there, fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Shireen.
And we are getting close to the end of the month of December. And as we've talked about, December is just like a selfish month for us. And we're just, having chats about like random stuff that we've kind of talked through or are coming up, whatever. We talked about Wicked. We talked about 2025 adaptations. And today I'm just taking everybody on a deep, dark spiral with me, apparently.
We're talking about Megan's Roman Empire today.
Yeah.
She talks about this at least once a week.
It comes up in my head a lot. Like, I really think about it on a regular basis, and I feel like so many tropes in more modern novels and television shows, movies, whatever, can be traced back to this.
Totally.
And to the mischaracterization of this novel. Legitimately.
Yeah.
It's very mischaracterized in a way that people seem to be refusing to accept, and that's not okay.
Ooh, I'm interested to hear what that's about.
Yeah, so today we're talking about the idea, to a degree, of Lolita, the novel, published in 1955 by Vladimir Nabokov, who was a Russian-American writer.
And pervert.
Well, not...
No, I'm joking.
Not really. That's what I weirdly, I will kind of defend him in this way, because nothing about, and that's the problem, because people only know of the idea of it from the idea of this like nymphette, quote unquote, that's been created from the movie versions and the adaptations. But in the novel, the subject matter is treated very differently than that, and is not meant to be taken the way that it has been, in my opinion, misinterpreted multiple times.
Interesting.
So when you've not read the novel and you go into these movies, you're like, what the fuck kind of pervert wrote this book? It's disgusting. Yeah. And when you kind of don't know that, and like I will say that yes, like it still kind of bothers me that this exists in the first place to a degree. And while like I can understand it, I don't necessarily think that it was necessary for the book to have been published in the first place. Whatever, but it was, and
I mean, it's made a big impact.
Very much, yeah. That's it. It's essentially created like an entire aesthetic, and that is. To this day, you'll still find aesthetics on YouTube or whatever, like how to, like, achieve, like, the Lolita aesthetic, which is the tiny, precocious seductress. I'm an innocent little girl, but also I want to fuck even though I'm a virgin. That was just, like, all of it. That's, like, all of it rolled into one.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, anyway, brief overview of everything to do, let's say, with, like, the novel, for instance. Like I said, it was originally published in 1955, and Nabokov was living in the U.S. at the time and figured that censorship would be quite hefty there, which he was, I'm sure, correct about, in the U.S. as well as in the U.K. So actually, unsurprisingly, because I guess they're very freewheeling over there, the novel was originally published in France.
Yeah, I guess
France in the 50s. Yeah. That sounds about right to me. France in 1955. Anyway, essentially the premise of the novel, just so that it's clear, it explores the phenomenon of something called hebephilia. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, which is characterized as, quote, sexual interest by adults in pubescent children, typically in the age range of 11 through 14. Ugh. Because, like, it's sort of difficult to describe that because, like, puberty can kick off at different ages for different kids, obviously.
But this is pre-pubescent?
This is pubescent.
Pubescent,
so, because if you think about it, this is hebephilia. Pedophilia is of prepubescent children.
I see.
And there's another one that I'm sorry I didn't write down the name of that characterizes the sexual interest of like sort of slightly post-pubescent kids from 15 to 18.
Interesting.
Yeah, there are different time frames, essentially. We're used to reading things or listening to things about pedophilia, potentially, right? Because, like, that's it. It's, like, the sexual interest in young children. I should have prefaced this with a big trigger warning.
I was going to say, I'm like, I've got, like, the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, sorry. So that essentially is what this is described as. But, yes, that's it. It's different. It's classified differently than pedophilia because it's, like, specifically children who have entered into puberty. Specifically, but have not
just
like
at the time
at the sort of on the cusp into it, and kind of like as they're developing to a degree before they hit a particular age where like most of that development has occurred.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very specific. Anyway, the novel is told in the form of, it's presented as basically it's fictional. The whole book is fictional, but it's presented as a fictional memoir that's being presented by basically an editor of a psychology book who has taken these like diary entries from a man who uses the synonym of, or the pseudonym, sorry, of Humbert Humbert. And the whole thing is meant to make fun of him. The entire fucking book is not meant to be on his side.
I see.
He's treated, like, he's characterized as not a good person. And he's also a very unreliable narrator through those diary entries. I mean... So you kind of delve into a lot of this. So essentially the premise is that that's it. This editor has taken these entries from this man's diary after he's died in prison for murder. He's passed away in prison. He was ill and he's passed away in prison, and now it's being like sort of compiled into this, what I can only assume is like a book of psychology of some sort to explore the idea of this man's particular illness and affliction that he has.
Which is hebephilia.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And so the diary entries present basically the idea that that's it. Humbert Humbert has moved to, he's from, I think, France. Yeah. And he's moved to the U.S. in the summer and is essentially winds up staying in a boarding house in New England. I think it's in New Hampshire, if I'm not mistaken, and is supposed to be, teaching, like he's gotten a professorship of some sort at a college to start at in the fall. He's, yeah, that's it. He talks about it having experienced the loss of his first love as a young teenager. He too, at the time, was also young in that same stage, and was in love.
12, he was 13.
Exactly, and was in love with this girl who passed away from typhus, and it created this like mental illness of sorts in him, where to him now the perfect girl, because he was, and also it was a love that was never like consummated or anything because they were very young, so it's like they engaged in sexual activity of any kind, and so it created this idea in his head that the perfect girl is in that age range. Right. Basically, like, that's the perfect girl and that's how she exists. So, yeah. So as an adult man, moves to New England and goes to this woman's house named Charlotte, and who's basically running like a semi-boarding house. So she's looking for people to pay her rent, essentially, and is... You know, she kind of comes on to him and stuff like that, and he's, like, uncomfortable with it because, of course, she's a grown-ass woman.
And he's like, ew, get away from me.
Adult
so
my
old.
age, disgusting. Anyway.
Does he see himself as a 13-year-old still?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, not really. Okay. I don't think there's ever any mention of that. Oh. And is sort of hesitant to agree to move in and sign a lease or anything until she brings him into the back garden and he's introduced to her daughter, Dolores Hayes, known as, like, she calls her Lo or Lola sometimes and stuff like that. He is the one who nicknames her Lolita. She's 12 years old.
Because it's a sexy name.
Yeah, she's 12 years old, and he becomes completely infatuated with this girl on sight, and essentially that's it again, decides that she is like his perfect soulmate, ideal situation, basically.
As somebody who's about to bring a baby girl into the world, this is making my skin crawl.
Yeah. So anyway, like I said, the novel's well regarded, obviously. Like, yes, of course, there's controversy around it because of the topics that it explores. But it is obviously, it's very well written. And yes, I will say, like, Nabokov never paints the picture, like, he paints the picture of an unreliable, very ill, very fucked up narrator who never, you can never tell, like, how much truth he's telling, because as the story progresses, Humbert, you know, seems to find a lot of instances in which he deludes himself into thinking that Dolores is seducing him.
Okay, so she's not actually, he's just making it up.
My understanding is no. Like, everything that I've gleaned from all that I've read is that no, she's not actually doing that. She's 12.
Yeah, like, I mean, I think that there's, like, a whole branch of psychology on this, like, child psychology on this, isn't there? Like, if you look at, like, the Oedipus theory and stuff. And,
yeah, those are, like, that's, like, another side of it.
That's, like, a whole, like, obviously they're not 12, these kids. They're, like, 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a whole branch of psychology, but that being said, I very much doubt, I don't know, who knows, right? I'm not an expert on this type of stuff, but sounds like this kind of explores, like, it kind of toes the line on these things a little bit.
I mean, to a degree, yes. However, like, there's a lot of explicit stuff that does happen
really?
in the novel. However, I find that when you get to the point where it's happening, it is still pretty clear, it should be clear to the people reading the novel that these things are happening to Dolores Lolita against her will.
Oh no!
Like she's not fully cognizant of participating in what's going on.
Oh, no.
Like there is.
Do I even want to know what's going
on?
Well,
like she's drugged at different times and stuff like that. Like there are things. Yeah. Like there's a lot of stuff like that. So,
yeah,
like,
I know nothing about this, by the way, people.
Yeah. So it's very much presented as something where like it's not like, oh yes, and she happily participated. No, not at all.
Ugh.
That's it. And where I think that's it, the character chooses to misinterpret maybe simple sort of affection with a fatherly figure as something romantic. Right. So Charlotte, at one point she makes like a comment about like Humbert being such like an interesting name and stuff. And like it's supposed to be funny because it's like absurd basically. And there's so much about it that's presented in a way where you're like, haha, like I'm supposed to hate this fucking guy. Right. But this is also why the novel especially prior to the first, but I think even now people have like revisited the films and seen the twists that have been made in it and have come back to say, no, this novel is unfilmable. You can't make a film adaptation of it because lo and behold, we're somehow going to try to turn this into like a romantic story of some sort. And so it is just not a novel that should be made for screen that way.
Because it's like, this is one of those that you need the internal monologue.
Agreed.
As like a contrast to show you what's happening in reality versus what's not actually going on.
Yeah.
And that helps you as a reader to see the disconnect between what's right and what's wrong.
Agreed.
Yeah.
100%. So yeah, I'd seen the film adaptation from the 90s, which like they're both different, I guess, to a degree. The 90s one overall stays closer to the sequence of events from the novel, where like, you know, in the 60s we were doing whatever we wanted with screenplays and adaptations. Anyway, I watched the 1962 version. That's it. So it came out, 6-7 years after the novel was published. Yeah. This film is directed by Stanley Kubrick.
Uh-oh.
So, who, by the way, just like, if you're like, oh, kind of, that name sounds familiar, blah, blah, blah.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Would direct One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, A Clockwork Orange, 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Shining, Full Metal Jacket. I can't think of any of the others. Eyes Wide Shut, right before he died. Yeah.
All very, touchy
very dark,
subject matter.
Yeah, and presented in very interesting ways. And the man definitely likes to make some changes to source material, which we've seen with The Shining and stuff for the story.
Stephen King was not happy with that.
He's never been, a huge fan of it. He's, like he said, he's basically, I think he was quoted as saying he can enjoy it the way that you enjoy looking at a beautiful Cadillac without an engine in it. Yeah. Which is a really good characterization, I think, of stuff like this. And essentially, even, that's it at the time. And see, that's why you could tell this shouldn't have been done, or there shouldn't have been men making this film is maybe part of the problem. Because Kubrick himself in interviews would go on to say that at its essence, this is a tragic love story.
Ooh.
And this is something that was characterized over and over and over and over again. Because essentially, really quick beats, because we're going to talk about this forever. Essentially what happens is that Humbert moves into the house, becomes close with Charlotte and Dolores, and was obviously obsessed with Dolores and calls her Lolita. And Charlotte is obsessed with him in turn. And I hate her characterization especially in the movies, not as the 90s one, she's not quite as bad. In that 1962 one, that was rough to watch. Shelley Winters played Charlotte, and she was just she was pathetic and drunk and sad. And she's a widow. Her husband passed away a number of years prior.
So no wonder she would allow anything to happen to her 12-year-old daughter.
Yeah, and also, she doesn't know what's going on. She does not know what's going on. Fair. And I will say, that's even pretty clear, the whole way through. But anyway, she falls in love with Humbert and stuff like that. And she gives him an ultimatum at one point because she's in love with him, that she wants him to either move out or marry her because she can't stand to be around him anymore because she's so in love with him, basically. Wow. And so, of course, he sees this as an opportunity to stay close to Lolita, so he marries Charlotte. Yeah. And then a while after that, she finds the entries of the diary and like letters and stuff like that and figures out what's going on and is like completely torn to shreds by the whole thing.
God.
And unfortunately, because back in the 50s, all the women went crazy, right? Runs out in a crazy haze into the street and gets hit by a car and dies.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then he gets to adopt her.
Oh no.
He's her stepdad.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, terrifying.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So then he like goes to pick her up from camp and there's like a cross-country road trip involved and it's really fucked up. Anyway, whatever. We get to the end of it and anyway, she kind of like leaves with this other older guy there's just old men preying on this poor girl in this fucking book. It's atrocious. Who like comes to like take her away from Humbert at one point, pretends to be someone else. And then by the end, she's like married to this younger guy. It's like been years she didn't want to see him anymore. And then she writes to him years later and is like, I need money because she's pregnant. She's married to a younger guy who's like in her age range, like maybe early 20s at that point. And she needs money for them and like the baby or whatever. So she writes to Humbert and he goes to visit her and she's like, no, I haven't fucking told my husband anything about this. That's crazy. Why would I do that? And then explains like what happened back in the day, that this other man impersonated someone because he was also obsessed with her and took her away for a while. And she managed to like leave him eventually too. And so basically Humbert is super dejected because he wants her to like leave her younger husband who's probably normal and then go with him. And she's like, no. And so he dejectedly leaves, goes to find this man who had taken her like away from him, shoots the man dead, and that's why he's in prison.
Wow, this book is wild.
It's wild, and then that's it. So, and he passed. Basically, the epilogue indicates that he passed away in prison while awaiting trial for the murder of this guy.
So who like is there? I'm assuming that there's some like diddling going on here.
Yeah. There's some stuff that happens like in it. Like I said, that's it. But it's also hard to sort of say what is or isn't real because he's such an unreliable narrator that he takes things to mean in like a sexual way that shouldn't be, or that she's like making advances on him and stuff. So Kubrick basically essentially said that this was like a sad, tragic love story. No. And that, like how sad, because he's like in love with this girl. I was like, oh yes, how sad. And well, I will just say too, that's it. Okay, so this was one of Kubrick's earlier films that he directed before he got like 60s, super big. Yeah. But like considering what he would go on to direct, I'm like, goddamn. And there were also like, the people in this movie were well-regarded actors. Like, this wasn't like a piece of shit film that was made. This was like a massive studio production.
Wow.
James Mason played Humbert. He was a very prominent English actor in the 50s and the 60s. He starred in things like North by Northwest, A Star is Born with Judy Garland, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Oh, wow.
He was a big deal.
Did this kill his career?
I don't think so. No? Because 1962.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, so no, and it introduced a young girl named Sue Lyon who played Lolita as the character. And again, she wouldn't go on to have too much of a prominent career after this, because surprise, surprise, the women never get to do anything after this. And again, like Shelley Winters played Charlotte. She was a really well-regarded actress for a long time.
What was she in?
As well. I forget. But it's like a name that pops up pretty regularly as well. And Peter Sellers, who would become a Stanley Kubrick regular, starred as Claire, what's his name, Claire Quilty or Quimby or whatever, who's the person who's also obsessed with Lolita and takes her away and stuff. And he plays multiple characters. That was a Peter Sellers thing. He was well known for that. He would play multiple characters in the same film. He does it in Dr. Strangelove. He does it in like a bunch of another Kubrick film. He does it in a bunch of stuff.
Kubrick liked to reuse the same actors.
He did, yeah. Well, I mean, like a lot of them do, right? They have like their people that they use on a regular basis.
Jack Nicholson was in a bunch of his stuff.
Yeah, well, The Shining, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I can't think of anything else right now, but yeah, exactly. That's it.
Two is a bunch.
Yeah. And anyway, Sue Lyon, that's it. So Sue Lyon played Dolores. She was 14 at the time of filming, but they also, in this movie, aged her up to 17. They were like, oh, she's 17, the character, because they wouldn't have her be 12.
Well, I mean, like, if he's characterizing this as a love story,
yeah, that's it, exactly.
Like, he had to do something to not be like perceived as completely fucking unhinged.
Completely disgusting, yeah, for sure. But yeah, that's it. It's just the whole thing. So many of the visuals were gross. There are several instances where he's painting her toenails and they make me uncomfortable.
I don't like that.
Yeah, no, I
don't like that.
This movie is 2.5 hours long. That is too long to be in this fucking
like at least
space.
an hour too long.
Oh my god, it's so fucking long. Anyway, it's also because like older films tended to be like that because they would cover like every bit of dialogue that there was to cover, and nobody edited anything out apparently. It's just a lot. It was just a lot. It was overwhelming. I've seen the other one before, and I can't. If I'm thinking about it now, I can't think of which one is worse. It might be the 90s one. I'm not going to lie. Because,
they were being a little bit more, like, daring, I guess.
With it, yeah. Where, like James Mason, like, whatever. Like, he was, I don't know, whatever. Maybe for the 1960s, he was handsome. But to me, he was not a good-looking man, particularly. But the 1997 version stars Jeremy Irons as Humbert.
Ooh.
1990s Jeremy Irons. Tall, svelte, good-looking, great voice.
No, don't like that.
Yeah.
No.
So you're just like, ew, why?
Yeah, no, don't like that.
Directed by a British director named Adrian Lynn, who, by the way, was known for very sexually charged films. He directed Flashdance, 9.5 Weeks, Indecent Proposal, and Fatal Attraction.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, very sexually charged. Very, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Ose.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
To a degree. Exactly, for sure. So that's it. Jeremy Irons stars as Humbert Humbert, who Jeremy Irons is like very prominent actor. He did, to this day, he's still doing a ton of stuff. The man's in his mid-70s and he's still like doing all kinds of stuff. And like, that's what makes me uncomfortable is that when you watch like the 1997 one, I'm like, oh god, he's handsome. Oh, I hate it so much. I hate it.
Is Lolita 12 in the 1997 one?
She was played by Dominic Swain, who I believe was 14 or 15 at the time of filming, and they made the character 14 instead of 12 in the movie.
Yeah, they couldn't do it, could they? Because...
And she's very, very coquettish. She's very like bratty, like a little like that little thing that they do that you're like
like, so this is my beef, right? Like, basically after everything you've said and knowing nothing about this, because I haven't read the book or watched any of these movies, if you're gonna make a movie adaptation about this, you got to make the kid 12 because it's supposed to be shedding light on like
how horrible this
is and like that it's a mental illness that this man has, not a love story. Because if that's the tone you're taking, I'm sorry, what does that say about you as,
oh my god, like, don't even get me started on that fucking shit.
As a director, as an audience member who's enjoying this, like, no,
there's something wrong with you. That's it. I agree wholeheartedly. But I just find that like this whole, hopefully this gives like kind of a brief overview of things, but I just kind of find that this is so interesting to see play out in certain other types of media as time goes on, because I feel like one of the most, like, I guess, perfect examples of something along these lines is Pretty Little Liars, Arya and Ezra. And it's like a student teacher thing, because again, like Humbert's a professor, and it's like the older, suave, very intelligent man. And literally,
interesting.
Yeah, if you think about, like,
I have things to say.
Yeah, if you think about like the age gap of it all, and like think about like the impact. Like Pretty Little Liars was a big fucking deal when it was
went
out.
on for a long time.
It did. It was like what, 7 seasons or something.
Like, I feel like Pretty Little Liars is feeding into this toxic trope of like, you know, somebody in a position of authority.
Makes it sexier.
Yeah, and like, because if I recall, because I did watch Pretty Little Liars, all of it, I believe Arya chased him for the most part.
In a lot of ways, because I think in that, like, in the first episode, after he realizes, like, okay, so they hook up a little bit in a bar, because she gets in with, like, a fake ID or something. Yeah. And then afterwards, like, basically, like, within a couple of days, he realizes he's her English teacher. Yeah. And he's the first one to be like, no, we can't do this. This isn't good.
And he's only supposed to be in his mid-20s,
He's like 22 or 23. Yeah. So, no, I get it. There's not as much of an age gap. It's still illegal.
It's still
and
illegal.
You're still her fucking teacher.
Statutory rape.
Yes, it is. And
because she wasn't like far in high school.
She's like, I think they're supposed to be like 15 or 16.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's like 15.
Yeah.
So I think there's like a 9 or 10 year age gap.
Yeah, which, you know, it's enough.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the person who initially is like, no, like, we can't do this. I'm your teacher. This doesn't make sense. We can't do that. And yes, she's the one who like pushes a bit more. I'm still that girl. But I mean, like, also at the same time, like, fuck, like, she's a 16-year-old girl who's getting attention from a guy in his 20s.
in a position of authority.
Yeah, of course she's gonna kind of be like that. Of course it seems like a cool thing to be doing, right? And like that relationship progresses in a way that's really fucked up. And even if you think about like at the beginning,
they get married.
Yeah, they do. Oh god, yeah, that's it. They date on and off for the entire show, and then they get married before the end.
Mostly on.
Mostly, yeah. But they break up like every 3 seconds at the beginning, anyway.
Well, yeah, because he's like, I'm your teacher, I can't. And then eventually we just kind of settle into this dynamic where it's like, yeah, he's like, you know, you're under 18,
well, by the
he's
end
over
of,
18.
What is it? By the end of like season 2, her mom's like, I'm willing to listen. And I'm like, Mom! What?
No.
Anyway, but even if you consider like even some other stuff that's going on, again, the girls in the show are all like supposed to be like, that's at 15, 16, basically when it kicks off. And even Spencer has a thing with her sister's fiance who's like 24.
That's right, yeah.
What the fuck?
Yeah, like it's very confusing to me when I watch these like teenage shows where the girls are like hypersexualized because
so much.
The way that they've been dressed in the costumes and stuff. Like I was rewatching The OC, for example, where like Marissa is always wearing the skimpiest of clothes, and like you know, there's like moments in these shows where they go to like charity events or whatever parties where it's like a bunch of like older guys. Summer in the OC,
oh yeah,
over like hypersexualized,
especially in the first couple of
seasons. Like she's going around in these parties trying to meet men, and it's like, oh, that guy's a hedge fund manager, introduce me to him. And you're like, you are in high school.
What are you doing?
And like they're all wearing these skimpy clothes or like these skimpy bikinis and like hanging out.
Yeah.
And like, you know, I'm watching it and I'm like, the early 2000s were fucking wild.
They were so weird.
Like, we just, like, were, you know, and there will be moments where they're, like, you know, at one of these parties, and one of the guys will be like, oh, like jailbait or something. Yeah, and you're just like, what the fuck?
Something, like, disgusting that you're like, ew. Oh, it's icky. And just to bring that back around, just to solidify what kind of unfortunate twisting impact that Lolita has had because of the misinterpretation, I think willful misinterpretation of the original text in turning these things into films and trying to make the character of Lolita actually come off as sexy in any way, shape, or form. Because basically what they were saying, I think like with Kubrick, for instance, was that they were like, well, essentially the filmmakers were like, well, we had to kind of do certain things with the character in the movie to make her like do things that seem like she's being sexually forward with him, because if not, you're gonna hate his character.
But that's what you're supposed to do.
Not for them. For them, it was like, well, no, then you're gonna hate what's going on, basically. Well, so we had to do something to make it seem like she wants to do it.
Oh, I hate that. Like, it's like defending him.
Yes, essentially.
In his actions.
It's like being an apologist for this character that doesn't need anybody to apologize for him.
Yeah, like it's like you've read this book and you're like sympathizing with him.
Yes, definitely. 100%.
Don't like that.
It's disgusting. And so just to bring that all back around, I think it's in the first or second season of Pretty Little Liars. There is a scene that I had like come across and watching some videos and stuff about this that I was like, oh yeah, where Arya is sitting at the cafe that they always go to, like the girls, you know, before school, whatever, and she's just sitting there gazing woefully out the window, and in front of her on the table is a copy of Lolita, not even facing her, facing the camera as it pans up to her face directly. Wow. Like, could we be any more fucking obvious with the metaphor that we're trying to put out?
So, like, again, we're being sympathetic to this character.
Sympathetic and posing the idea of, like, well, you know, she's telling him she wants it.
Yeah, so, like, what could he do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And, like, that really was, in the end, the feeling in Pretty Little Liars. Yeah. Like, she keeps throwing herself at him.
She throws herself at
over
this guy.
And over again, to the point where she kind of breaks him down, and he's like, fine, like, I guess we'll be together. And I remember watching it and being like, ew. Ugh, like, this is so uncomfortable.
Oh, it's horrible.
But it also, you know, obviously a lot of this makes me think about that other film that came out.
Miller's Girl.
I
know what you're thinking about.
You know, and nothing in that movie explicitly says that they did anything that wasn't allowed, because it was all in his head.
That's kind of that's like what's presented.
But at the same time, it's like, we're still exploring this topic.
Oh, God.
We're still doing it from the perspective of she's throwing herself at him. Yeah. Therefore, what could he do to help himself?
Yeah, that movie made me mad when I watched it. I was pretty angry by the time I got to the end of that one. And I also hate just as one final thing, I'm sorry, I feel like we're going on forever, but one final thing that I really, really hate with a lot of these things, and you see it in Lolita and you see it in Miller's Girl, is the wife. The wife is always a drunk piece of shit. She's mean to her husband. Mean.
Like, of course he's going to go after the prepubescent girl or the pubescent girl.
In Miller's Girl, they're like, she's drunk and sloppy and stuff. And you're like, ew, what the fuck is this? It's not, this isn't like, you can't start to try to justify this. Mm-mm. It's gross. Mm-hmm. And I hate it very much. And that's something that I find you see play out a lot, is that the wife is cruel, or she's like fucked up in some way. And it's ridiculous. Yeah. And it's also completely unrealistic, because that's almost never the case when these kinds of things actually might take place.
Even if she was.
Yeah, if there's not an excuse for it.
Even if she was, like...
Get a divorce, damn.
You know, probably because she knows she's in love with a fucking pedophile.
With a gross pervert. Yeah, exactly. That's it. She can sense it. Women can sense things.
Yeah, seriously.
Oh, God. Yeah, anyway, this is just something that, like, I guess I wind up thinking about on a regular basis, because, again, there are so many up into, that's it, this year, there are movies like Miller's Girl that are put out into the ether that have this kind of premise to them and are somehow still trying to make a justification for these things, and it's ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. Stop acting like this is okay. None of it's ever okay.
But the way that they're made is, like, to show that, like it's a gray area or something.
There's nothing gray about
There's nothing gray about it. It's wrong. And it's like, yeah, but if she's throwing herself at him, like, you're not going to tell me any 12-year-old girl is going to willingly throw herself at a grown-ass man.
She doesn't know how to do that. She does not know how to do that unless he makes her do that. And I'm sure that there are many women who have been groomed in the past by people, particularly in positions of authority, who would probably also agree with that. Yep. So, and I can only imagine the kinds of things that they've had to recover from.
Totally.
So anyway, this is just something that I can't help but come back to, because I guess I become disappointed that, first of all, that, you know, overall a novel that, yes, like maybe I'm very on the fence, so I'm like, maybe this novel did never need to be published, but at the same time I get it, because it is a well-written book, and it's also, you know, it's exploring a really kind of like very messy topic, very disturbing topic that, like...
Well, it sounds like it sheds light on...
It kind of does. That's it. So that's where, like, I go back and forth about it so much, where I'm like, but at the same time, it really... And when it was published and it wasn't presented that way, and, like, that's it. The film version, like, Nabokov was alive for the 1962 version, and he wasn't too happy with the way that it turned out, because he had written the original script, and Kubrick changed a bunch of it, and then did a bunch of rewrites with one of the other producers, so it changed a lot of the narrative. And I believe that a number of years later as well, his widow also would say, I wish that there was more focus on, I believe the quote that she, like, her quote specifically was something along the lines of, like, I wish that people would interpret this correctly and focus more on this poor little girl and what she goes through.
Wow.
And so I find that that's very astute, that, like, obviously they were fully aware of what the actual story was, and it would be nice if people didn't feel the need to come back to over-sexualizing the idea of a young girl tempting an older man. Yeah. Anyway, this is something that I think about, and maybe you think about it too now. I don't know. I'm sorry if I've sent
now I'm going to be thinking about it.
I'm sorry. I've sent everybody on, like, a rabbit hole dig into it anyway.
She had to get it off her chest.
It really bugs me.
We'll do my Roman Empire next time.
Yeah, that's fine. That works. Anyway, if you have any, like, kind of, like, commentary about this, or maybe you feel differently than I do, I don't know, whatever. You're entitled to your opinion. But anyway, you can let us know about stuff over on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at fullybookedca. And feel free to head over to the website at fullybooked.ca and check out our newsletter and check out all of the regular contributions that our wonderful team is making over there. But until next week, guys, the last week of the year of 2024, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.